Welcome to License to Spend with Tim Whisler from the Whisler Agency. Immerse yourself in expert insights on financial strategies that will empower you to confidently navigate your way to retirement freedom. Join us on this journey towards financial confidence. It's time to take control of your financial future.
Changes could be coming to the federal tax code. The problem is, well, we don't know for sure. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is set to expire at the end of next year, and that could impact your financial decision-making and your portfolio. I'm Patrice Sikora with your host, Tim Whisler. Tim, please explain this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, but then we're going to get into what the heck could happen or not.
That's exactly right, Patrice. We just don't ever really know, right? We have no idea. They'll talk about it. They'll throw out some dates. And the next thing you know, I'm like, well, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. But so I just think it's important for us to be aware of what this act has done for us, what's going to happen potentially at the end of 2025 as we flip the calendar into January of 2026. So first of all, this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, this was signed into law back on January 1st of 2018 by President Trump. And what was so powerful about this was that it had some what they call sweeping changes, to the tax code, and it really impacted individuals dependent upon, their income level, their filing status, and their deductions. So, like for example, as most people are aware, we have 7 different tax brackets. 5 of them were lowered because of this tax bill. Another significant change was the standard deduction was significantly raised, not only for single filers, but also for married couples who filed jointly. So those deductions helps reduce our overall lower tax bill for that calendar year. And then again, the child tax credit, that was a really big deal. I think a lot of people remember that. The child tax credit was raised again. So whenever you look at current legislation and how taxes are impacted, it's not just the tax brackets that we have to be mindful of. It's credits, it's deductions that can obviously, impact what our overall tax bill is for that current calendar year.
Now, this bill was not only for individuals, it was also for businesses, correct?
It did. It did. I'm actually kind of just looking here at one of my screens, and it talked about how, it provided some tax cuts to corporations. So, for example, the Whisler Agency is a corporation. I, as Tim Whisler, is simply an employee of that corporation. So whenever, I pay myself a salary, it comes from the corporation to me, myself as an employee. So I remember the first few times of paying myself and seeing how the taxes were actually a little bit lower than they were previously, prior to that tax bill. So that was a nice little benefit too. It provided some corporate tax rates. And now again, we're going to get into this obviously in greater detail, but it's just, should we continue to kick the tax can down the road? Well, obviously the answer is no, because of the fact that there's so much ridiculous amounts of spending that's going on. And in order for them to maintain the spending, where are they going to get the money from? Well, they're going to have to continue to look at taxes as that revenue. So we've got the individuals that are paying their taxes and corporations that are also impacted by taxes as well. But yes, the Tax Act did actually help, with some corporate taxes as well.
And I think we should tell listeners we're kind of laughing and joking here because it was a major act. Yes, it could change, though. We don't know if it's going to change. It does, as they say, sunset at the end of 2025. But
right.
We don't know what's going to happen. Tim, when will we know if it's going to happen, if there will be changes?
Well, as I've talked before, one of the best decisions I think I ever made in my career was being able to join and become a member of Ed Slott's Elite IRA Advisor Group. I have gained so much incredible amount of resources through that group, and it's just so much fun. I wish my clients could be just a fly on the wall, just for a portion of the time there. I know most people are like, I can't tolerate IRA conversation for a day and a half. I understand. Neither can we, but we're there. but what we always talk about is any time that there is upcoming legislation or something they're talking about, that is the number one question. When is it going to be enforced? And we don't know. Period. That's just the name of the game, because a lot of times we find out about it after it's already been put into force. So, and again, it's a topic of conversation when there's a room full of, a couple hundred advisors led by Ed Slott and his team. And, Ed's a 40-year CPA. I mean, this guy is ensconced himself into tax law and helping clients now help advise, he's helping advisors help clients reduce their overall tax liability. And that's the big thing. All we know is that the current legislation is going to sunset at the end of 2025. You flip the calendar to January 1st of 2026, it could be like it was back in Y2K. Are the lights going to be on when it changes over to, who knows? I have no idea. I mean, we know that the current law is going to sunset. What is it going to mean going into 2026? Is it going to revert back to what it was before? I would say at a minimum, yes. But again, back in 2017, we didn't have the deficit we have today. We're right now at 35, as of this recording, we're a little over $35.3 trillion in debt. And that thing is just continuing to compound. So it's just a matter of us understanding that, okay, we know the law is going to change. We just don't know when. So the best course of action for us to consider is let's start doing some tax planning now while we know where the rates are at, because that chances are, and again, I don't have a crystal ball. It's still on order and it's on its way from China. I don't know if it'll ever get here or not. But since we don't know what the future is going to hold for us, and we simply look at deficits and we look at spending, we can only really assume it's going to go back to what it was before at a minimum, if not worse. But we just don't know when it's going to go into effect for sure.
And I think we really should make it clear, too, that the people making this decision are in Congress.
Absolutely. This is what we call legislative risk.
Yeah.
It's one of the most damaging things. During our working years, it can be somewhat aggravating, for example. But I'm telling you, Patrice, when we're talking to folks who are in retirement, and we're now looking at all the different buckets of assets that we have built for decades of working and saving and accumulating wealth for retirement. And now you need to start taking income. That silent partner known as the IRS has a significant say in how much you'll be able to have in income. So therefore, it just behooves us to not stick our heads in the sand and just hope it goes away, because it's not going to go away. When we have tax deferred accounts, those dollars reside in what we call the forever taxed bucket. And if we don't really think taxes are maybe going to be changing in our favor anytime soon, then let's talk about them using Ed Slott's quote: pay the taxes while they're on sale. Mm-hmm. Pay the taxes when they're at their lowest rates. And how do we do that? We sit down, we go through a tax planning conversation, we look at the assets that we have, we look at the tax classifications of your assets, because they all reside in one of three buckets: tax deferred, taxable, and tax free. Well, obviously, the tax-free, we have to, how do we get the buckets into those dollars into the tax-free bucket? We have to kind of talk through that, and we have to be strategic in that, because maybe it's not a good fit for everybody to walk through that process of paying taxes to get to a tax-free bucket. There's obviously some moving parts to that, but I think it behooves us to at least sit down and entertain the idea of considering what future taxes, may impact when it comes to our retirement income.
Well, let's have that conversation as if we were both still working.
Mm-hmm.
We have access to a 401k.
Yep.
What should we do? Maximize tax deferred contributions? Should we look to tax free right now? What should be the tactic, do you believe?
That's a great question, and I love the transition. So, in fact, this is starting to kind of come up a little bit. It comes to mind of a couple I'm now starting to work with, Kyle and Amanda, just so I can reference who they are. And Kyle works here in Peoria. They live over in Bloomington, and he hears me on the radio quite a bit. And he'll be 50 later this year. So they're kind of on the younger end of the scale of clients that I work with. But he goes, you know what? We kind of feel like we're on the right track, but we don't know for sure. And I've heard your radio ads and I've listened to some podcast episodes. We kind of just want to know, what should we be doing while we're still working as we close out these working years? And I'll share this on our podcast, just like I shared with Kyle and Amanda. When you work for an employer who provides you with the 401k option, right? That defined contribution plan, right? And they offer a match, take advantage of the match. In other words, if you're working in a company, ABC company, and they offer you a 401k and they say, okay, Mr. and Miss employee, if you contribute X percent into your 401k, we'll match X percent. Okay. Whatever that percentage is, and as long as your budget can handle that, contribute up to that match, because I hate to use the word free money, but what else can you call it? It is. It's free money, right? Now it's free tax deferred money. So that's the first half of it. Okay. So let's say your company will match up to 5%. if your budget can allow it, and you can kind of, pull back on your take-home dollars, you contribute the 5, they match the 5. Okay, that's the first thing we need to do. Take advantage of the matching 401k dollars. Number 2, if they now offer a Roth 401k, okay, sometimes they'll offer matching, sometimes they don't. Now, what's the difference between the pre-tax and the Roth? The pre-tax, because you're making contributions, it lowers your tax bill for that year, right? It's a deduction, okay? The Roth is funded with after-tax dollars. So it does not lower your current taxable year's income, but it creates a bucket of tax-free dollars that you can have access to in retirement. So there's a give and take, right? You think in terms of there's one particular chart that I always have with me in my money book. Looking at taxes through one of two lenses, the micro lens and the macro lens, right? I'm going back to my days in economics 101, right? The micro lens is when we look at taxes for this year. How can we lower and minimize our taxes for this year? Well, we look at tax deferral. Fine. You look at it through the lenses of macro, big picture. What am I talking big picture? Taxable liability through decades of retirement, years of retirement. How can we possibly minimize our taxes over a lifetime? Now we start looking at tax-free. So if we can kind of maybe start that path early while we're still working, contribute to that Roth 401k if it's available. If it's not, let's talk through that. Okay. Again, this all goes back to a budget. Don't put yourself into golden handcuffs. We're like, okay, I really want to focus in on contributing to a 401k and setting up a tax-free dollars. The first thing you need to make sure that you do is set up a budget. And I know everybody's like, oh man, I don't want to do that. Well, nobody does, right? We don't want to track where our dollars are going because it holds us accountable and responsible. But you know what? It's time for us to do that, especially if we want to take this very seriously. So my recommendation would be look at your expenses. Okay. What do we need? Food, shelter, clothing, housing, etc. What do we want? Cell phones, entertainment, out to eat, right? Record all that. Where are we at? If we're able to contribute up to the amount that your 401k can be matched and you still have some dollars to go, if there's no Roth 401k available at your employer, then open up your own Roth IRA. Because if we're under the age of 50, right now under current law, we can contribute up to $7,000 a year for 2024 into that Roth IRA. If we're 50 and older, the government gives us an extra $1,000, what they call catch-up contribution, and we can go up now to $8,000. So while we're working, let's focus in on taking advantage of the matching 401ks and taking advantage of the Roth 401k or the Roth IRA, depending upon, again, what your budget will allow.
And if you find out, if you have not been told whether or not there's a Roth option at work, ask.
Yes.
There may be one.
Great point. Absolutely. Bring it up because it's not really, it hasn't been around very long and it's starting to now gain a little more popularity as I'm engaging with clients in conversation and they're still working and we're going through that. As we're looking at through statements, I'm also asking, what's your salary? How much do you anticipate maybe your salary increasing from year to year with raises? Are you contributing? If so, how much? If so, how much do they match? Do they have a Roth? We want to make sure that we're aware of what's available to us while we're in our working years. Definitely.
Talk to me about conversions.
Conversions, again, I kind of use the analogy throughout our conversations of when you have tax deferred dollars, it benefits today, but builds a tax liability for tomorrow, i.e. retirement. So therefore, when we start talking about tax deferred dollars, in my mind, I immediately start thinking of the RMDs, required minimum distributions. And again, just as we talked before, whenever Congress is involved, it's called legislative risk. They can change things, right? And in the last 4 years, they've changed RMD rules twice. When the Secure Act was passed in 2020, they did away with the 70 and a half age and made it 72. Then for whatever reason, who knows, all of a sudden the Secure Act 2.0 came out a couple of years ago and they said, well, wait a second, we're going to change this again. And they broke it down by years of birth. So for example, if you were born between the years of 1951 and 59, your current RMD age is 73. Okay. If you were born in 1960 and later, your RMD is 75. So therefore, okay, so now that we know under current legislation, now again, will that change again by the time that we get there? Probably.
Probably.
Chances are favorable, yes. So all we can do is, okay, let's set the game plan in motion based upon under current legislation, what we know. All right. So now do we start talking about conversions? When does it start making sense for us to do that? Well, there's a lot of variables. So I kind of just keep it at a high level. The conversation we have is, okay, let's look at your assets. Let's kind of predict and kind of forecast using a very conservative model of rates of return from one year to the next. How much will your RMD, your potential, asset be worth to generate your RMD? Because that's very eye-opening for a lot of people. I think of Ed. Ed came and talked with me. He came to one of our showings of the baby boomer dilemma this past May. Came in and we had a great conversation. And Ed's 58. So based upon his year of birth, his RMD age is 75. I said, Ed, and he's got a fantastic portfolio. He's done very well for himself. He's just kind of wants to know if he's on the right path, if he can retire. He's kind of targeting 60. And I said, well, Ed, one of the first things we're going to do is make sure we set up a balanced portfolio for you. And we've talked about this before in other episodes, the difference between diversification and balance. And we'll save that for another conversation. But I just pointed out to him how much he has in current tax deferred dollars. And if we don't address this now and start talking about conversions, that tax bill could be a monstrosity at 75. That's 17 years from now. You put anything into a bucket of money for 17 years, chances are it's probably going to double at a minimum, if
and
not.
You have no clue what the taxes will be on that.
That's the key. We have no clue what tax rates are going to be in 17 years. So therefore, what we always kind of talk about, Patrice, is let's look at the variables and let's also look at age, right? There's really no minimum age for conversions. We just have to be mindful of how old are we when we start to convert. So what I mean by that is, again, taking some analogy from Ed Slott when he talks about the age of 59 and a half to RMD as being the sweet spot. What do we mean by that? Well, at 59 and a half, you basically now have access to your retirement assets, traditional IRAs, Roth IRAs, et cetera. In other words, you can access those funds if you want to take a withdrawal and not have to pay a pre-tax penalty, or a pre-withdrawal penalty, I should say, not pre-tax, pre-withdrawal penalty. So therefore, we might still be working, right? We're 59 and a half. Maybe we're going to work until we're 62, 65, whatever. We have access to those tax deferred dollars. Not that we're going to spend them, but we might want to start doing some Roth conversions. So what we do, just to kind of, if I can summarize an answer to your question, a conversion basically helps us run an analysis where we look at asset values, we look at your age, we look at your current income. Because if we do a conversion, moving dollars out of that forever tax bucket into the never tax bucket, what do we have to pay? We have to pay taxes. How are we taxed? We're taxed at whatever current income tax bracket we're in. So for example, as I'm looking in here at one of my tax charts, let's say we're married filing jointly, which in the 22% tax bracket, we might reside anywhere between the 94,000 up to 201,000 of earned income for this year. Okay. So let's say husband and wife together are making 120 grand, just keeping it very simple. And we want to do some Roth conversions, maybe some converting some forever taxed into the never taxed. We know that 22% tax bracket peaks at 201 or is capped at 201,000. So maybe we just do some conversions up to that amount without spilling over to the next one. My whole point is it's different for everybody. So let's sit down. Let's look at your assets. Let's look at your timeline. Let's look at what your goals are going to be in retirement and determine whether or not a conversion even makes sense.
And reflecting back on the changes that could be coming with the tax law, how long a lead time do you need to do conversions before, if this does change in 2026, January 1, as we kind of believe it will at this point,
right?
What kind of a lead time do you need to get everything converted that you want?
That's such a great question. I think it's so good for everybody to understand this. Obviously, it's based upon a calendar year, right? So when we convert, the dollar amounts have to be finalized and converted by the end of that calendar year to count for that calendar year, okay? So what happens at the end of every calendar year? 2 major holidays. all the calamity that comes with Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? All the joy and all the shopping, everything.
The stress, yes.
Plus the stress. Plus now you think in terms of, okay, what do we want to do during these holidays? A lot of people take time off. Well, in the world that I live and the different resources we use, the same can be true about those people, right? People working at Schwab, people working at all the different entities we work at. So therefore, my general rule of thumb is to say, hey, look, if we're going to do some conversions, let's start talking about this in the third quarter at the latest so that we can implement it, hopefully, and have it all done before November even gets here. That way, then we don't run in the risk of something we can't control. If they can't process it quick enough because maybe they're short-staffed,
Right.
or it takes some time for dollars to go from entity A to entity B to get converted, we don't run that risk. So I think just a general rule of thumb, let's get this thing rolling before October. Let's just say before Halloween. How about that? That way, then we give ourselves plenty of time before the end of the year gets here, so we don't run the risk of missing out on that year of converting dollars.
How do you start the conversation with a new client that's coming in?
Just in general, what we're doing is we're having what we call that discovery conversation. We'll get to the statements. They know to bring in statements, because if they engage with us, ahead of time and set the conversation, they're going to be emailed or mailed a document collection checklist. So they know what documents to bring with them, including their tax returns, right? Because there's a purpose behind that. And so that way, then, Patrice, as we're having that discovery conversation, I've got a legal pad of paper in front of me, a couple of documents for some questions that I'm going to write in some answers to, and we're going to kind of follow through what are their values, what's their retirement look like, and then we're going to get into the numbers, because to help me understand, first of all, am I even qualified to be a potential candidate to serve them as a retirement income planner? I'm not the right fit for everybody. I know that. So it allows us to, number one, ascertain whether or not I'm qualified to help them, and number two, if I can even help them. So that discovery conversation, involves, if they're still working, okay, that's great. What is your salary? How much are you contributing? Everything we just talked about. Also, too, what's your anticipated timeline? If somebody's like, well, I really don't know. Okay, well, let's talk through what might help you know. What are you kind of thinking about doing in retirement? We've talked about this before. The go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. Right? Let's plan for those go-go years. When do you want those go-go years to start? So, we'll kind of talk through that timeline a little bit. Then we'll also talk about some legacy planning. Okay, do we just want to leave behind whatever's left over? Or do we have specific ideas in mind we want to leave for the kids? What are some concerns? Why are we talking? What are we hoping to accomplish with a conversation? Are you concerned about protecting assets from market volatility? Or are you concerned about what we're talking about today, taxes? And I hope that we are. If you have any sizable amount of dollars in that pre-tax bucket, that traditional IRA, that 401k, those dollars are earmarked for taxes at some point down the road. And again, just like we said, Patrice, we have no idea how much we're going to have to spend in taxes when it comes to that time frame. So basically, that discovery conversation involves a lot of kind of high level types of items. In other words, kind of get acquainted types of things. So that way, if they find it appropriate to come back for the second conversation, now that gives me the opportunity to kind of share with them what I call that initial analysis, making sure, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Client, did I hear you correctly as far as what concerns you want to address and using these dollars? Do I have everything dialed in? Yes, we do. Perfect. Now we've established a good foundation. Now let's start peeling back the layers. Mm-hmm. How do we protect assets from volatility? What about longevity? What about survivorship? What about taxes? We're not going to talk about it today, but again, when you have taxable income in retirement, if you have too much, how much of that can impact your Social Security benefit? It can also spill over into your Medicare premium. If you have too much earned income in retirement, they'll ding you on Medicare. You'll pay more for your premium. So there's so many moving parts that go into it. And again, for those of you who are listening, please don't let this overwhelm you. Okay. We're sitting here talking about this in great detail to let you know that the resources and the experience that we have are here to help leverage these for you. We'll talk through this. We'll make sure that you have a good understanding of the assets that you have, but also more importantly, what are you trying to accomplish? Oh, I want X amount of dollars of income coming in to complement Social Security and maybe a pension. Perfect. Then let's build that game plan. I'll bring the storm clouds in. I'll talk about the negative impacts of taxes, market volatility, longevity, and all that. But let's set up the game plan, have the discovery conversation, and get yourself set up with a foundation for the retirement income plan to fund your go-go years in retirement.
Well, I'll tell you, Tim, you may bring the storm clouds, but they always have a reason for being there. We do need some of the rain, right?
We do. We sure do.
Right.
Yep.
Is there anything we haven't touched on that you think we should? I mean, there is so much that, as you've said, we don't know yet. Congress has to act on this. Congress may not act on this. Congress may act on this, and then in the middle of 2026 say, okay, we're putting it into effect now. We just don't know. but we need a plan.
Exactly right, Patrice. It's just something we have no idea on. And so what I kind of look at is we obviously don't have foresight, but we have hindsight. And one of the things that I have in front of me here that I, again, received from Ed Slott being a part of his group is looking back at what tax rates were in the past. And again, I think I've talked about this before, but when we came out of World War II back in the mid 40s, we actually had a tax bracket of 94%.
Wow.
It only lasted 2 years and it went down to 91. Wow, what a break. But but it was between 91% and 91% tax bracket from 1946 to 1963.
Wow,
17 years we had 91 or 92%. That was the highest. Now, very few people hit it, but there are some people who did hit that. Then it dropped down to 77 in 1964. Then in 65, it was at 70% until 82. Then it was at 50. So my point is, our highest tax bracket today is 37% under current legislation. If it goes back, if tax law reverts back to what it was before the Tax Cuts and Job Act was passed, it'll be 39.6. Regardless, those are nowhere near what they previously were just a few decades ago. And what's different? The deficit. We didn't have the deficit back then that we have today. That should grab your attention, because now all of a sudden you've got deficit that's compounding interest, and more people are retiring. More and more people are going on to Medicare. More and more people are on Medicaid. More and more people are on Social Security. You start compounding this thing. It's not a measure for us to bury our heads in the sand and say, well, I hope it doesn't happen to me. We have to be aware of this. Mm-hmm. We want to start doing some tax planning, because where are they going to get the dollars to fund these programs? They're going to have to come from taxes. So you're exactly right. We don't know what Congress is going to do with legislation. All we need to know is look at numbers, look at math, look at our history. We learn from history. Those who look at it, learn from it. Those who ignore it, pay for it. And we want to make sure that we're at least aware of, like, saying, wow, Congress aren't going to raise tax brackets this level. They did. They have. What could stop them now? So I'm not saying it's going to happen, because who knows what will happen. We just want to be mindful of what's happening. Just again, so what we can do, we can benefit from years of saving dollars for retirement and generate as much tax-free income as we can for those glorious years known as retirement.
Tim, how can people reach you? Because boy, there's so many questions that are raised here. People really do need to look at their situation and plan.
And I hope they do. So they can reach out to us a couple of ways. Obviously, number one, our phone number is simply area code 309-291-0491. So again, it's 291-0491. They can send us an email, tim@thewhisleragency.com. Again, there's still no T in Whisler. It's Whisler. And again, just for some more resources, maybe to listen to some previous podcast episodes, or even better yet, go to our website, thewhisleragency.com. And at the upper right-hand corner, you'll see that there's a tax bill calculator. And we put this on not too long ago, just to give people kind of an idea, an overall general idea, just by plugging in a few dollar amounts, what their future tax liability might look like. And I dare to say it'll shock you, because we don't think in terms of for all these years, we've been focused on taxes through that micro lens. Let's change the lenses, look at big picture, and let's start talking about reducing your overall tax liability.
All right, folks, there is time to plan, but the sooner you start, the more information you'll have to work with, and time is important. Follow this podcast to know when a new episode is ready for you. Please share with others, of course, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you for listening to License to Spend. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The views expressed herein reflect the views of the Whisler Agency. As of the date of publication, these views may change as conditions change. The views expressed herein are not intended and should not be construed as investment advice, and they do not address any individual's specific situation. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the Whisler Agency. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Investment advisory and financial planning services are offered through Foundations Investment Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Insurance, consulting, and education services are offered through the Whisler Agency. The Whisler Agency is a separate and unaffiliated entity from Foundations Investment Advisors, LLC. This podcast is designed to provide general information on subjects covered pursuant to IRS Circular 230. It is not intended to provide specific legal or tax advice and cannot be used to avoid penalties or to promote, market, or recommend any tax plan or arrangement for insurance products discussed guarantees or backed by the financial strength and claims-paying ability of the issuing insurance company.